Hey everybody, Dan here with HardlyBrief Tutorials. Today we're going to be starting a brand new series where we build an infinite runner using Unity 2D. I know it's been a super long time since I created a video, and I couldn't come up with a better idea on how to create a new video besides starting a new series. So this is what we're going to do. I've already created a bunch of the project, so I have a whole bunch of videos lined up, so you guys can look forward to that. At the end of the video, I'm going to show kind of a development timeline or a plan of what the next several videos are going to be like. In this video, we're going to focus first on world spawning, and then the next couple videos we're going to focus on player controls and player movement. But in order to do all that, we need a world that we can play on. We need a space that we can kind of move around in and have fun in and test. So that's what we're going to focus on in this video today. So I'm in a brand new Unity 2D project. I have a couple things here added in the hierarchy. I have a scripts folder with one script in it. The script is blank as of now, but it just says I've called it World Peace. And then in the hierarchy here, I have a game out object 2D sprite called player. I also tagged it as player. I have in my assets folder, which is also in the down in the description available to download, is a white sprite. It's just a white 256 by 256 pixel sprite that I'm using so that I can color the player. So I just dragged and dropped it on top of my player and then changed the color to this blue. I created an empty game object by right-clicking in the hierarchy and create empty. I called it World Peace Parent. And then under that, I have three other game objects, this World Peace Anchor, which is this green piece, and then two other pieces that I've turned off the game objects. And I'll go ahead, as we code and stuff, I'll describe more of what those are for and why they're there. But I wanted to get the scene kind of set up and started for everybody before we really got started. But the first thing we're going to focus on is this anchor piece, the World Peace Anchor. So the first sprite you should make is the World Peace Parent, which again, right-click, create empty, and then a right-click 2D object sprite, create the World Peace Anchor, and that's what we're going to focus on first. Once you have that created, we can jump into the scripts folder, create a new script called World Peace, and then open it up in the editor that you're used to using. I'm using Visual Code. Let me know in the comments down below if it's big enough for you all to see. If it's not, I can go ahead and make it bigger in the next video. But the first thing we want to do is do a require component type of and box collider 2D. We're going to use this box collider to determine what we're calling, or what I'm calling, the anchor point. So in order to build each part of the level, we're going to start with this green piece, and then we're actually going to attach this purple piece, let's say, to the top right corner, or the anchor point of this next piece. And then once we do that, as the player's running along, we're going to want to turn on the next piece, so World Peace 2, and then also attach it to the end of the purple piece, and then our player can just continue running. And what's cool about this design, or at least I think it's cool, is that each of these pieces, they're just different colors now, but they can be different shapes, they can be different sizes, they can be multiple levels, they can be all sorts of different things. And then we can write another script that manages how that world is built. But in order to do all that, we need to have these anchor points calculated and set up. And that's what we're going to do in the World Peace script. So now let's go into that script again. I'm going to open it back up, and we're going to delete the update and start method because we don't need them right now. And the first thing we're going to do is create a private box collider 2D, and this is so that we can store a instance of it within this script so we can access it to calculate our anchor point. So we're going to say private box collider 2D, and I'm going to call this a bounding box. It can pretty much be called whatever you want, but that's what I'm going to call it. I'm also going to create a public vector2 anchor point, and this is going to be public, but it's going to have a private set. So we're going to say get, get, and then private set. So what this is going to do is this is going to allow us to access anchor point outside this script. So if we get a reference to World Peace somewhere else, we can say, okay, well, return that value. But it's not going to allow us to set it. We can set it within code, which is what we're going to do now. So what we want to do is create a void awake method. And in this method, we want to first find our box collider. So we're going to say bounding box is going to be equal to this dot get component, and we're going to say get component box collider 2D, which again, this is going to give us a reference to the box collider that is required, which is a required component for whatever we attach this script to. And then the next thing we want to do is actually go ahead and calculate the anchor piece point, or the anchor point position, basically. So we're going to do a private method here, and I'm going to call it calculate anchor point. And we actually just return a vector 2. And what we'll do is say return new vector 2 parentheses, and then I hit space so we can do this on 2 lines to kind of go over what we're going to look at. So the first thing we want to do is say bounding box dot bounds dot extents dot x, and I'm just going to type this out, and then I'll go into Unity, explain kind of why I'm doing this. This dot transform dot position dot x plus, and then parentheses, this dot transform dot local scale dot x times bounding box dot offset dot x. And then I'm actually going to highlight this whole row, copy it with Control C, paste it with Control V, and replace X with Y, because this is the same formula for Y. Now there's 2 ways that we can actually calculate this anchor point. One way is this way, and there's a specific reason why I'm doing this. And oh, don't forget our semicolon after our parentheses there. Okay, so there's 2 ways that we can do this. One is the method that I created here, or you can actually just look at the bounding box, the box collider bounds dot center and extents, and add the extents dot x and the extents dot and the center dot x. You can add that to find this anchor point. Excuse me. But what happens is if you don't force a physics update, so if you don't turn the game object on and off, after you've moved the piece once, the bounds doesn't update properly. Or I guess it updates properly, but it doesn't update as I would expect it to. So you have to basically force a physics update or disable and then re-enable the game object. And I didn't want to do that, so I went ahead and created this function that I can call, and then it returns this vector 2. So in the awake method, after we get our bounding box here, we can then use it. So we can then say anchor point is going to be equal to calculate our anchor point. And then we can go ahead and say debug.log, and we'll just say AP, and we'll output this to our, and that should be quotes. We can output this to the logger so we can see that we got the right value. All right, so I control S to save. We'll go back into Unity, let it load, and we'll see if it worked. So the first thing that we need to do, click your world piece anchor sprite. I'm going to drag and drop this component. It should automatically add a box collider 2D, which it did. And then I'm going to press play. And assuming we have no errors, we should be able to calculate our top right corner, which is 7.9 and 1.3. Okay, so now that we've generated this, you can see down here it says 7.9 and 1.3. So you can actually go into Unity and count these boxes. Let me zoom in. Hopefully you can see this on YouTube. You can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 0.9 because we don't complete the whole box here. And then again, starting from 0, 0, 1, 0.3. So there, we have our top right corner. So now what we can do with our other anchor pieces, let's stop play. We can actually drag and drop this script onto it, and it's going to automatically again create that box collider because it's a required component. And now each of these will also, assuming they're on, let me go ahead and turn them on real quick. On the awake method, they're going to all output their top right corner, which you can see they did, and they're all different, which makes sense because, again, they're further along in the path. Cut. Okay, so now that we have the ability in script to find that top right corner, and hopefully that kind of makes sense where we're actually finding the so-called anchor point for the next piece coming down the line, we need to write a method that sets this position. So once we have that piece, we're going to use the previous piece. So to set this purple piece here, we're going to look at the green piece anchor point and then calculate the position of where the purple piece should be. And that is going to be the responsibility of the world piece script that the world spawner or the world generation script is actually going to call. So hopefully that makes sense. If not, after we code it, it should make sense. So let's go back into our world piece script, and we're going to create a public method that's going to return void, and this is going to be called set world position. And this is going to take, again, like I said, this is going to take a vector2 position, which is just our previous anchor point. So we'll say vector2 previous anchor point. And this is a pretty simple method. This is going to do two things. First, it's going to set this transform's position. So we'll say this dot transform. Let me scroll down a bit. This dot transform dot position is going to be equal to a new vector2, and it's going to say bounding box dot bounds, or excuse me, previous anchor point dot x plus our bounding box dot bounds dot extents dot x minus parentheses bounding box. We need our offset, so we'll do dot offset dot x times this dot transform dot local scale dot x, comma, and then on the next line we're going to say y is going to be 0, and that's just a standard height that we're going to keep throughout as we generate the world. We can come back and change that later. This doesn't mean that the level will all be one height, is meaning that every piece that we generate will be set to the same starting height, that the piece that you create can be as big as you want, and I'll show that in the coming videos. But for now, we'll just leave it at 0. The last thing we need to do is once we set the position of this world piece, we need to recalculate our anchor point. So I'm going to recall this anchor point is equal to calculate anchor point after we move the object. So if we go back into Unity, we shouldn't have any errors. Nothing really changes. If I press play again, it's just going to output the same debug statement before. But what we need to work on now is actually creating the spawner script, so the script that's responsible for spawning the object. So before we do all that, let's go ahead and create in our assets folder a folder called resources. So right click new folder, and we'll call this resources. And then in that folder, we're going to right click again and create a new folder. And this is going to be called world pieces. And this is where we're going to store our prefabs. So the idea is world piece 2 and 1 are going to be prefabs. So we can actually right now drag them into our world pieces folder. They're now prefabs. So we have 2 prefabs. I can delete them from the scene. We don't need them. And when we call this in script, we'll do a resources.load. We're going to go ahead and grab these 2 pieces, and then we can position them using the script world piece that we just wrote. So now on our world piece parent, we want to go ahead and create a new script that's attached to it. So I just clicked add component, and I'm actually just going to call this world piece spawner. New C# script. Let it load. It adds. I'm going to double click, and we're going to load it up into Visual Code, where we're going to start. We don't need the update method for now, so I'm going to delete it. But we are going to create a couple variables. The first one is going to be a public world piece, and this is going to be called our anchor piece. So this is our starting point. And the next thing that we're going to do is create a private variable, which is going to be a reference to, actually we don't need to do that. I was going to say we can create a private variable reference to this transform, but we don't need to do that. What we do need though is a private constant string, which is going to be our world piece path. So we need to actually tell Unity when we load load the resources from the resources folder, we need to tell Unity where to go to get that. So we have our world piece path, which in this case, if you labeled the same, if you did the same labeling I did, it should just be world pieces, and then your /, and then again semicolon, and then everything's going to happen in the start method. So what we want to do in here is first make a game object array. So game object and then the 2 brackets makes an array, and we're going to call this all world pieces, and we're going to set this equal to resources dot load all, and load all we can pass in what we want, so we're going to return a bunch of game objects. Load all returns an array, and then we want to say world piece path, which is so what this line does is it loads all game objects that are at this path, which is where we have all of our world piece prefabs. Okay, so now that we have this, we've loaded our game pieces. What we need to do then is loop through all those pieces and then actually set them and place them in the world. So what we'll do is write a for loop. We'll say for int I is equal to 0, I is less than all world pieces dot length, so as many as in that folder, and then I plus plus, do our brackets, and the first thing we want to do is say game object, call it go, is we're going to use the instantiate function, and we're going to say all world pieces of I. So with the first one, we're going to instantiate it into the world. We're going to say go.transform.setParent, and then we want to set it to this.transform. All right, so this world piece spawner script is attached to our parent. It's going to control the spawning. So what we're doing here in this line of code is we're saying the game object that we just instantiated, so the first world piece, get its transform and set its parent to this transform. So what that will do is in Unity, what that will do is in Unity, it will store all of our pieces under the parent. So it just helps us keep a little bit more organized. So then after we do that, we want to set our game object active. And we're doing this because later on we're going to have a bunch of methods that are in our on, enable, and disable methods. And then we're going to go ahead and get a reference to the world piece to get our anchor point. So we want to say world piece is going to be equal to our game object that we just created dot get component, and we're going to say get the world piece component, and then we want to say piece dot set position. So now that we have the game object, we want to set our world position, and we're going to pass in the previous endpoint, which we haven't created yet. So we need to make a private variable that allows us to do that, and we're just going to make one right below our game object array. So we're going to say vector2 previous endpoint. Yeah, we'll call it previous anchor point would be better. And to start, this is actually going to be equal to our anchor piece. So anchor piece dot anchor point. So I just double clicked, copied that, and again set world position takes a vector2. So we're going to pass in our previous anchor point and with a semicolon, and then we need to update our previous anchor point to the current piece. So we'll say piece dot anchor point. Yep. All right. So let me do a quick run through of what we've done here. First, we created an array of game objects, and we're going to load all the game objects that are in the world piece path, which is that folder we created in Unity. Then we're going to loop through all these pieces, and we're going to create them all in one shot. Again, we're going to change that once we get player movement down, but we want to create a world at first. This for loop handles that. So we create a game object, we set its position, we set its parent, we then calculate the next anchor point, and we just loop through all of them until we're done. So I'm going to hit Control S to save, and we're going to go back into Unity. And in Unity, we need to drag and drop our anchor point like that. And if all goes well, we should press play and our pieces should load, which they did. So as you can see, we've calculated the point. the anchor point, which is the top right corner. We then instantiated this purple piece. We had set its position to where it should be based on the previous anchor point. And then we did the same thing for the purple piece or the pink piece. And now once we get player movement set up, our player should be able to run. And we'll just keep doing this and repeating this process. So now if you want, you could actually create tons of these prefabs. So if I go in the resources folder, and I think I can just Control D to duplicate them, press play again, and we should have 4 pieces instead of the 2, which we do. It's hard to tell, but they're there. So there you go. All right, so that's the first video. Again, hopefully you guys enjoy it. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. Please like and subscribe to the video. After this, I'm going to do a quick rundown of what you guys can expect in the upcoming videos. Again, the next video is going to be about player movement. We're going to get this little blue guy to start moving around, jumping around, and then we're going to further expand on world generation and player movement and player abilities, again, over the next few weeks.